Hi, this is Shannon Johnson. I'm here today with Mindy Leonard, one of our senior resource team members, and we are talking about gun safety for seniors. And we're super excited about our guest today. This is Sara Knizhnik. I was anticipating the last name that I couldn't get the Sara right. So she is founder and CEO of Safe Illinois. She is also a Lake County board member in District 18. And she is very active in gun violence prevention initiative and things like that. So, and Mindy knows her very well. So tell us about how you met and your relationship.
We met, going on 6 years. I think it was after the Parkland shooting.
Sounds right.
And just gun violence prevention became very, very important to me. And Sara was already a key player in that movement. And so that's how we met. So we haven't seen each other in a long time. It's so good to finally see you.
Nice to reconnect.
Yes, it's really nice. One thing I just want to say off the bat is we are not going to be debating at all the Second Amendment or whether somebody should have a gun or shouldn't have a gun or gun laws. We're not even talking about that.
This is not a political discussion.
No, we are just talking safety.
Exactly.
Safety, because guns, it's a fact. People own them, right? So let's just talk about how to be responsible, what to do if our parents or other people we love own them, and the best ways to just make sure that everybody around us is safe.
Absolutely.
That's what we're talking about. So let's get that off the bat, right? Let's clear the air right away.
Because we're probably sitting here with different views ourselves.
Uh-huh.
I know I have very different views than my grandparents did.
Right.
We won't even talk about how guns were stored in my grandparents' house compared to my parents and myself and my children. So we're all very different.
Exactly.
And it's okay.
And that's a good thing.
But the safety is the key issue that we want to talk about. And why is that important? And so I looked up some statistics because I wanted to know, and Mindy had brought up some interesting facts. So according to the National Safety Council, injury facts in 2022, there were 4,822 accidental or preventable gun-related deaths in the U.S. So bottom line, Sara, if there are guns in the home, how do we store them safely?
So make sure that they're locked up and that the ammunition is kept separate from the gun itself.
When you say locked up, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but can you just go a little bit deeper on what that actually means, what the options are?
Sure. So primarily there's two ways to secure your gun. You can do that with a cable lock or with a safe. I'm going to talk first about the cable lock and then about this different options for a safe.
Okay.
So cable locks are kind of what they sound like. It's a locking device, kind of similar to what you'd see like you're locking up your bicycle, like the old-fashioned, there's a cable and you wrap it around your wheels of your bike and it's got a little locking mechanism. So it's kind of similar to that. The thing about cable locks that are really nice is they're relatively easy to get for free. So most law enforcement agencies around the country will give them away for free. If you have, in my county where I live, which is Lake County, Illinois, we are just about to launch through our state's attorney's office a county-wide network of our partner organizations, community-based organizations who will be giving away free gun locks to anyone who walks through their doors and asks for them. So there are initiatives like that going on around the country as more and more communities realize what a big problem it is that too many people don't secure their guns when they're not being used. The thing to know about cable locks, and could not be more important, especially I think for your listeners, if they have young children in their home, either living there or visiting on a regular basis, such as grandchildren. Cable locks they're great for preventing an unintentional shooting by a child, a very young child. So for toddlers, anybody under the age of, say, 4 or 5, they're really just a great choice. Just get a free gun lock, secure your gun when you're not using it, make sure the bullets are not stored inside the gun. But if you are concerned about keeping anybody older than the age of about 4 or 5 from getting access to that gun, you really need a safe. And the reason is because cable locks can pretty easily be broken. And anybody who has the skills to access YouTube or TikTok and look up a video on how to cut through a cable lock, they can do that quite easily. And it also, another big reason you would want to lock or secure guns when you're not using them is not only for safety, but also because, well, it is a downstream safety effect. You don't want your gun stolen, right? So if there were to be a break-in in your home, you want to be sure that gun is securely locked. And you know, a thief who wants to steal your gun, they can be quite lucrative on the illegally trafficked firearms market. A cable lock is not going to stop that person from stealing your gun. So again, cable locks, really great in some very narrowly defined situations. But if you're trying to protect children over the age of, say, 4 or 5, and you're really serious about making sure your guns cannot be stolen, then it's really just imperative that you get a safe. And you can get different kinds of safes. They range in price, as so many things do, from maybe $50. I've even seen them as cheap as $40 on Amazon, all the way to, you know, really fancy ones for hundreds of dollars. But when you're looking for a safe, it's really, the gold standard really is a biometric safe. So if you literally, a biometric safe, it has a little sensor on the front, and if you put your finger on the sensor, the lid pops open. You can literally access your gun through a biometric safe quicker than you can call 911. So it's and of course you're the only one. It's only your fingerprint that will let you into the safe. And again, they're not that expensive. Biometric safes you can get for $50, $60 on Amazon.
What about seniors who may have firearms in automobiles? Are there options for safes in automobiles too? Because when you talk about stolen, guns getting stolen, and that can happen in a car too, plus unintentional shootings can happen in a car. So how do you store one safely?
Yeah, same answer, very similar answer, right? A special biometric safe that is designed to be locked into your car.
Okay.
So that product is on the market, and it's extremely important that you lock up your gun while. Let me restate that. It's very, very important if you keep a gun in your car that you keep it locked up, and it is not good enough to lock it in your glove compartment box.
Right.
Some cars have locking glove compartments. That's not enough. A thief can get through that lock very easily. And it is a fact. We have hard numbers to back this up. Firearms being stolen out of locked vehicles is a huge source of illegally trafficked firearms, which end up disproportionately appearing on the streets of marginalized or underserved communities, and that really feeds the high rates of violence that you often see in those communities. So I'll give you an example. I live near the city of Chicago, and we have clear, solid numbers backing up. A huge number of guns are stolen simply out of the United Center parking lot. United Center is where the Chicago Bulls play. There's a huge number of crime guns that are stolen from that parking lot every year. And so that phenomenon happens all over the country. So locking up your gun in your car in a safe, not the glove compartment box, it is really, really crucial.
So even if you're, say, going to the range to practice, when you're finished, you need to go home and store that gun.
Absolutely. Yes.
It's not, you're not going to go out to dinner afterwards. You're not going to and leave that in your car. You need to go home.
If you want to go to dinner afterwards and you have a safe in your car, that's not your glove compartment, right? But as long as it's locked up and the safe cannot be physically picked up by a thief and carried away, right?
Right.
You have the right kind of safe. Then please go to dinner, right? But it's I would go right home and lock it up if you don't have the safe in your car.
Yeah, that's great advice, because I think sometimes people don't think about that if it's a regular activity for them, and it might be. That's a Friday night activity. We go to the range.
Exactly.
I know people who that's date night. we go to the range. So it's important that people understand that. You mentioned grandparents, and I talked about we don't always have the same views on gun safety and things like that. If your grandchildren are visiting grandma and grandpa, and you know there are guns in the home, and you are just, say you're anti-gun
as the grandparent,
as the parent, and your children are going to grandma and grandpa's house,
Mm-hmm.
and grandpa has guns in the house.
Mm-hmm.
How do you have that conversation with the grandparents about,
Mm-hmm.
if my children are coming to your home, here are my expectations?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's not going to be comfortable, and grandpa's probably pretty,
Set in his ways.
yes, thank you.
Well, I would recommend keeping the lines of communication open and always being ready with a compromise, right? So if you expect that you might find some resistance talking to your elderly relative, your parent, who, if you ask them to lock up their gun in order for you to allow your child to visit, come ready with compromises. So maybe offer to buy the safe that is needed in order to lock up the gun. At the very least, you could even compromise and say, look, I own the safe. I will bring it with me while we're there. We'll lock it up. And then I will, when we leave, I'll take the safe with me, right? So there's always a way. Where there's a will, there's a way. And honestly, if I'm the parent of 2 children, they're grown now, but I got into the habit of always asking before they went to anyone's home, do you have guns in the home? And if they said yes, I asked if they are locked up. And if they weren't, then I said, well, why don't the kids come and play at my house then? And there's no need to make a big, discussion about it. You can just be very straightforward and say it with a smile on your face, although I've gotten a little off track from the question you asked me, but.
But it goes, whether it's grandparents or
Yeah.
the kids are going to their friend's house,
Right.
it's important to know,
Yeah.
because we do hear about those accidental shootings,
Yeah.
and they're tragic.
They
And
certainly are, yeah.
we don't want to become a statistic, or our family or our friends,
No.
and that's what this is about, is safety.
Yeah, and I
first
will
and
just say
foremost.
one last tip I would say after years of experience of having these kinds of conversations with folks. The person you're talking to will mirror your attitude, right? So if you start that conversation just in a very calm, relaxed way, without mentioning your personal views on guns, but just with a smile on your face and just this is just a matter of fact thing. The same way, like if your child had a nut allergy, you would ask, that if there's any peanut butter in the home, that it not be shared that day, right? Just act like it's no big deal, and you're more likely to get a more positive response from the person you're talking to. Because really, it shouldn't be a big deal. The only reason it's a big deal is because this issue has been politicized in our culture. And when this issue is politicized, no one but the gun lobby wins. Everyone else loses, right? So, yeah.
So true.
What
That is so
about if somebody is moving their parents into an assisted living or some other type of a facility, or moving someplace where firearms might not be allowed? What happens with those firearms? What can people do if they need to get rid of them?
So I would recommend contacting a reputable gun dealer.
Okay.
But that would involve quite a bit of research. You just want to make sure that this is a gun dealer that practices responsible business practices, and, for example, doesn't sell a gun to someone without conducting a background check first, because you wouldn't want to own a gun, sell it to someone, and then it eventually be ended up used in a crime, and then have that gun traced back to you. You wouldn't be liable, but most people don't want to have. They don't want a gun that they own to end up hurting someone, right?
Right.
So just very important to do your research, find a reputable gun dealer. You could also contact your local law enforcement. Some local law enforcement agencies will either take the gun off your hands. That's not really common, but I have heard of it from place to place. But they will certainly talk to you and help you understand your options about how to dispose of the gun. It is important to know and I realize you have people with all different views on guns listening, and that's wonderful. But for people who really feel strongly about this issue, it's important to ask, if you turn the gun over to law enforcement, to ask what happens to the gun. What do they do with it after that? Because unfortunately, there's an issue of most law enforcement agencies in the country, when they collect guns either through their investigations or they receive guns, for example, through a gun buyback or any way, really, they then need to dispose of the gun. And there are companies that will not charge law enforcement agencies anything at all. It's a free service They will take those confiscated guns for whatever reason that they were confiscated, either because they were crime guns or someone turned them in. And that company will recycle the guns. So all that they do is dismantle just one piece of the gun, and they take it apart and sell it back to the gun industry, and then it's recycled back into the parts are made into new guns. So for some people that's not a problem, right? Because, you supporter of the Second Amendment, there's really nothing wrong with that. But some people don't want that. They're getting rid of the gun because they don't want it out there anymore, right? Especially if you were the gun owner and you want to be sure that the serial number associated with your name is never tracked to a crime, right? So these are just some of the things to think about and some of the questions you would want to ask when you're trying to figure out what to do with the gun.
Another piece of that, say you have mom and dad's guns, maybe you are a gun owner, maybe you have your FOID license, maybe you don't. Here in the state, that's a state of Illinois thing if you're listening out of state. Is there anything that you need to do to transfer ownership if you're taking them into your home and hopefully securing them properly?
I'm sorry,
Does that question make
I just didn't
sense?
catch whether the person bringing the gun into their home is a FOID card owner.
They may or may not be. First of all, they need to be a FOID card owner.
So the first thing is make sure you are a FOID card owner and that your FOID card is valid.
Yes, that's the very first thing.
Yes.
And remind me again what that acronym is.
Firearm owner identification card.
Thank you.
And not every state has them.
Right, that is
Illinois does.
here in the state of Illinois. And there are background checks conducted and things like that before you
Limited
get
ones.
that card. And if you get a concealed carry license, there are additional requirements for that as well as classes. So that's a whole different
Yeah, and all of
topic.
those, like the requirements are different in every state. So
Of course.
yes, but in Illinois, yes, you're exactly right. In order to get a firearm owner identification card, there's a limited background check. If you are applying to get a concealed carry license, it's a more intensive background check that's more complete. So, for example, to get a concealed carry card in Illinois, you must submit fingerprints. You do not have to do that for a firearm owner identification card. But those are the kinds of regulations that vary state by state.
Of course. And so if you have your FOID card and you're going to take mom and dad's guns into your home, is there anything that you need to do to transfer ownership of those items, or you can just take mom and dad's
But you just
guns
have to
into your
be
secure
according
them
to the state of
properly.
Illinois, what you're required to do by law is have a valid FOID
A
card.
valid FOID card. Okay.
None of the rest of the things that we've been discussing are required by law, but by the moral code that I think most of us try to live by, it is very much required that you
So
have
in the state of Illinois, we
safe
don't
or
have to
cable law.
register them or anything like that. We just have to
Correct.
have a FOID card.
Correct.
Okay. So
But it's different in every state.
every state, we're specifically talking about the state of
Yes.
Illinois. All right.
So I guess the first thing is find out what the requirements are in your state. Right? Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's probably the starting point.
And yes, and I'm glad I have an expert. That's why we talk to experts and we don't try to assume anything.
Right.
All right. So dealing with seniors specifically, sometimes there are mental health issues. We deal with dementia and Alzheimer's and things like that. As we see these challenges start to take a toll on your seniors' mental health, we also see some aggression at times. How do you productively have those conversations early on with those seniors in your life that you know are gun owners? And as a child or a loved one of those people, you want to make sure that we preemptively make sure that those guns are secured or taken out of the home if need be. How do you approach that?
Well, I'm a big believer in just communication, as clear as possible and as open and honest as possible. I think if you feel that a parent or elderly loved one is looking at a future that might include some of those illnesses, then it's as soon as you think that day is on the horizon, sit down with that person and explain, what you plan to do when the time comes that you think they are at risk in order to have access to that gun. And if you happen to live in a state, Illinois is one of these states, if you happen to live in a state like Illinois that has a red flag law, We call it the firearm restraining order in Illinois. And if you happen, not every state has red flag laws, but if you are fortunate to live in one that does, then be sure you understand what the steps are for getting a firearm restraining order. In Illinois, the firearm restraining order is a way that you can have a firearm temporarily removed from the possession of someone who you believe is at risk of harming themselves or someone else. And it's a process by which you can have an emergency firearm order of protection if you feel the person maybe is having suicidal thoughts or doesn't understand the decisions that they're making. Then you can have that firearm, ask a judge to have that firearm removed within, I believe it's 24 hours. And then a couple of weeks later, you have to go through a formal process in order to get that extended for up to 1 year. But it's the judge that makes the decision.
Okay.
And if to be eligible to request a firearm owner identification card, you have to either be you have to be a household member of the person, of the firearm owner. You don't have to be married to them, but you have to live in the same house. So you could be just a roommate, right?
Okay.
Or if that is not your situation, say you have an elderly relative who owns a firearm and you feel like they might be a threat to themselves or others, you can ask the police to make that request for you, right? So those are your two options with the firearm restraining order here in Illinois. So my recommendation is early on when you think your loved one might be heading down that road to that type of health problem, tell them about the firearm restraining order, make it clear that this is what you plan to do when and if, the time may never come, but when and if the time comes, that you need to help ensure their safety or maybe the safety of other people living in their home. And then make sure that they understand what the steps are so that they know what will happen in advance so that they're not being taken by surprise, right? And approach it as this is us working together in order to keep you and everyone in your life safe, right?
Exactly.
So the more you can emphasize it's a team, we're a team to keep each other, you, Mr. or Ms. Gun Owner, and everyone else in the family and among our friends safe, right?
Right, and we do so many other things to keep seniors safe. We get the rugs up so they don't trip.
Right.
We make sure there's grab bars in the showers and
Yes.
things and around the toilet and things like that. This is just another piece of that.
And I'm so glad you brought that up because I'd love to make the following point. Why do we do so many other things to keep seniors and also young children safe? We baby-proof our homes, we pull up the rugs, we install arm rails so they don't fall down the stairs. Why, if you ask yourself, why don't we take the same approach with firearms? And it goes back to what I said earlier, because this issue has been politicized, and the only people that win from the politicization of guns is the gun lobby and the gun industry, right? Because they're capitalizing on
When anything becomes
right.
politicized.
So when we hesitate, right, to have these kinds of safety conversations with our loved ones or our friends, we're sort of feeding into the larger problem, not just because we want to avoid a difficult conversation. First of all, I don't believe the conversations have to be difficult, right? If you approach them kind of the way I described, not with any emotion, like it's really not about how you feel about guns, it's about keeping the person
I love what you
safe.
said. They're going to give you what you give them.
Right, exactly.
So if you come at them,
right.
expect to get the same thing in return.
Exactly, right. And when I say that, I'm particularly talking, I know there are a lot of listeners who maybe they're the children of strong gun rights proponents, but they themselves really don't like guns and are deeply uncomfortable with them. You'll get a lot further with that relative or friend who's a strong gun rights proponent if you don't go to them with an attitude of you're doing something wrong, right? If you go to them with an attitude of let's work together in order to keep you and everyone else safe.
Absolutely.
Right, and it's removing that element of making somebody feel defensive immediately and just making it normal conversation. And I recently read a story about a man, and he was in his 70s. His gun was in his nightstand, and in the middle of the night, his wife had gotten up to use the bathroom, and he thought it was an intruder, and he shot her, and he has some dementia issues. So there's a lot of different scenarios that can happen, and we don't want anybody in that situation.
No.
So I think your tips are right on.
Yeah. Well, and I get the question a lot. You haven't asked me this, but I get it so often. I think it might be helpful. Is it all right if I
was
raise
going
a
to
new
say,
issue?
what have we left
Right.
out?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Thank you. So a lot of people ask me, especially when I say things like, look, you really need to lock up your gun and keep the ammunition separate. The gold standard is a biometric safe. And, what they'll say to me often, and it's a perfectly reasonable question, it's like, but I'm concerned about maybe a home intruder. If someone breaks into my home, I don't have time to go get my gun and put the bullets in. And I never quite knew for the longest time how to answer people, because they were genuinely concerned about keeping everyone safe, but also protecting themselves in the case of a home invasion. And I finally asked someone who's been a longtime mentor of mine. He's a lifelong, well, he's now retired, but he served over 25 years in law enforcement. And I asked him, what does he do? Because he's getting, a little elderly now. And I said, what do you do with your gun, and what do you say to people when they ask you that question? And he said, well, when someone asks me that question, that tells me they are not adequately trained to use that gun, because if they were adequately trained, then that would not concern them. And I was like, oh, really, no one's ever really pointed that out to me. He says, yes, I'm 25-year law enforcement agent. My gun, in order to keep the rest of my family and my nieces and nephews and grandchildren safe, I keep my gun not in my bedroom, but way up in a closet on the top floor of my house. I know exactly where it is. It's in a biometric safe. The bullets are kept separate from the gun. And he says, I am absolutely not concerned. If someone breaks into my home, I will hear them, and I know exactly how many steps it takes to get to my gun, and I have so much training, and I'm consistently getting that training updated, right? I have so much training that I can get the bullets in the gun I can get to the gun and get the bullets in the gun in 20 seconds or less, right? And that is another thing that we don't talk enough about. If you're truly a responsible gun owner, then you need to not only be trained in how to use the gun properly and safely, and how to store the gun properly and safely, but you need to keep repeating that training consistently over time. And if there's one thing that I'm just most disappointed in the gun industry and the gun lobby, it's they used to talk about that, how important it is to be responsible with your guns. And I would just, more than anything, I would love them to start really talking a lot again, right? And using their voice that is so loud and prevalent in our culture to really help us get the message through that there are ways to use and store guns safely, and it's very, very important. And it's important to stay up to date with your training.
Absolutely.
And I mean, like all businesses, they operate on a profit motive, and they should. There's nothing wrong with that. That's a profit-making possibility, is to offer proper training and
ongoing training.
So I would love to see a little more creativity on the part of the gun industry and how we can work together to make everyone safe.
I love that thought. I love that thought. And it's true. If you haven't physically held that gun in your hand and you know how heavy it is, how to get the cartridge inside of it, and how quickly you can do that, what the bounce back feels like when you fire that firearm, you don't know what you're doing when you're firing it.
Well, and my friend, the mentor, to your point, he said, because I have so much consistent ongoing training, I don't fumble around.
Exactly.
It's what are they? Muscle memory, right? And if you're not able to load your gun, well, first get access to your gun, find the ammunition. If you can't go through all those steps using muscle memory, then your risk of hurting yourself or someone else unintentionally just goes through the roof. Right?
Exactly.
Well, and then there's the emotion that you're feeling
exactly.
when you think your house is being broken into. So now you have all of that, and that's not something that an average person is used to feeling. Even police officers in their training, they talk about, losing feeling in their extremities or different things like that happen when they're faced in very dangerous situations. And those are trained professionals, not an
Right,
individual.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I have no problem with the gun industry marketing their products as something that will help keep you safe. If that gives people a sense of security, great. Like, I want people to feel that sense of security. I just wish that they would also talk about how important it is to be properly trained and store the firearms properly.
Agreed. Yeah.
This has
Thank
been
you.
such good information.
Yes.
Sarah, thank you so much for spending some time with us
My
today.
pleasure, really.
We will link all of her information and some things about gun safety and ways to get that information to you in our show notes and things like that. And we're so glad you joined us, and tune in again. Thank you so much.
Thank you for being here.